Last time we talked about Mary, Queen of Scots, and her dramatic second marriage. The whole country was thrown into chaos after she fell head over heels for Lord Darnley and practically dragged him into a royal wedding. Today, we continue with what happened next and how Darnley ended up murdering his wife's trusted secretary. After Queen Mary got married to Lord Darnley, Darnley was given the title of King of Scotland, and Mary was infatuated with him. It was passionate, fiery, and grand. She lavished him with affection, praise, and daily gifts. And the honeymoon suite was, by all accounts, full of joy and sweetness. Naturally, Darnley must have felt like the luckiest man alive. He was dazzled by Mary's stunning beauty and charm. But he was only 19. It didn't take long before it all went to his head. He started behaving as if he really was the king on his own right, and soon enough, Darnley's true nature started to show. The moment he let his guard down, his shallow and frivolous personality came shining through. Physically, he was fairly sturdy, thanks to all the riding and hunting, but emotionally, not even close. He was famously jumpy and easily scared. Now, to be fair, he had charms and was quite skilled in courtly manners, very polished on the surface. But peel back even one layer and there was no real depth. On top of that, he was arrogant, quick-tempered, and sulky. He often treated subordinates harshly, throwing his weight around whenever he could. And when people started flattering him, he completely lost his head. He even demanded Mary make him her successor to the throne in the event she dies without heir, which Mary wouldn't do no matter how much she was in love. He also began attending council meetings. He wouldn't actually say anything useful, just deliver pompous speeches about how the country should be run. He was the kind of person who thinks they have a lot of power just because he was a family member of a person who has power. And he liked throwing around that imaginary power even though he knew nothing about running the country. I guess we often see this even in the 21st century with the family members of elected officials trying to influence the governance of the country, so it must have been much worse back in the 16th century when the kings and queens actually had nearly absolute power. With her half-brother Moray gone after the failed Protestant rebellion, Mary had hoped that Darnley would help her lead the country. But he was not capable of filling that kind of role. And naturally, disappointment followed. And it didn't take long for Mary to see his true colors either. But did she really love him as a person? Often, a whirlwind romance is not about the love for the partner as a person, but more about one's own feelings. Mary, a lonely young woman of 23, may have just loved being in love. He just happened to be the one standing there with the right credentials when she was ready to fall in love. But as incidents involving Darnley's poor behavior kept happening, Mary's feelings began to cool and regret began to creep in. Nonetheless, Darnley successfully performed his duty in other departments, and Mary soon became pregnant. But here's the thing about people like Mary. When their heart goes cold, it really freezes over, and she wasn't the type to pretend to make the other person feel better. So her change of heart showed plainly. Mary withdrew everything she had given him. He was excluded from all state affairs, and she told everyone not to refer to him as king anymore, just as the queen's consort. And he was no longer allowed into her bedchamber. It just so happened that Mary was pregnant at the time, which made for a convenient excuse not to share the bed with him. Now, if Darnley had reflected on his own behavior and tried to set things right, maybe this whole story would have gone so differently. But he was not that kind of person. Instead, he went around complaining to anyone who would listen. He was telling everyone just how ill-treated he was and how bad he felt, as if those were something to be proud of. And when he got worked up, he would lash out, threatening people, talking about how dangerous he was, and a terrible revenge he was planning. Unsurprisingly, people began to avoid him, and if they had to be around him, they just politely ignored him. For Mary, who now had to manage the kingdom all on her own, her greatest support was her secretary, David Riccio. He originally came to Scotland with the ambassador of Savoy, but he was an exceptional musician, and Mary hired him as her court musician. But beyond his musical talents, he was sharp-witted and impressively cultured. Eventually, Riccio's career took off. Mary's former secretary had been caught taking bribes from England and was swiftly dismissed. That's when Riccio was suddenly appointed to the role. And once in that position, he turned out to be surprisingly brilliant. Any document that had passed through his hand stood out from the rest. So from then on, all important papers went through him. Naturally, that meant he also began to wield real influence. In fact, when Mary rushed into marriage with Darnley, the reason the wedding came together so quickly was largely thanks to his competence. He supported Mary's decision, even though he had some doubts. Later, when Mary was drowning in regret, even showing signs of depression, it was again Riccio who comforted her. He organized various court events to lift her spirits. And in turn, Mary rewarded him generously and gave him her complete trust. Even after everyone else had left the room, Riccio was often the one person she would continue talking with. But the higher he rose, the more enemies he made. Many nobles wanted to regain favor with the queen, and they started complaining that Riccio was manipulating her and monopolizing her attention. Those nobles wanted Mary to depend on them, because that's how they would get their own share of power and perks. But with Riccio running things smoothly, they were left out in the cold. Over time, he became the common enemy among the aristocrats. And because he was often the one solving sensitive issues with the Vatican, rumors started that he was a spy for the Pope. Now, what the nobles wanted was for things to go back to how they were before Mary's marriage, when Mary was simply a figurehead living her happy little French-style life, while the Protestant nobles, with Moray at the top, could share the power and profits. And for that, Riccio had to go. And then they can detain the queen to separate her from her own supporters while they bring back Moray from England to regain control of government. They figured that once their forces gained control, Mary would have no choice but to accept the situation. Then, during one of their secret meetings, someone came up with a brilliant twist. Bring Darnley in on the plot. Apparently, everyone in the room smiled knowingly at that idea. At the time, Darnley was a mess, drowning in bitterness and frustration, so they approached him and quietly shared a plan. At first, Darnley hesitated. He was scared and it showed. But they knew just how to push his buttons. They told him Riccio and the queen were having an affair. That single accusation hit Darnley like a hammer. He had already been suspicious, and this seemed to confirm his worst fears. Then the conspirators added one more jab. How do you even know the baby in the queen's belly is yours? That line pierced him like a blade. In truth, what tormented Darnley most wasn't politics or power. It was the fact that he was ghosted by his wife. The deeper the resentment, the clearer he realized how much he still loved her. To Darnley, Mary was the ultimate femme fatale. He was drawn to her, consumed by her. And now, in his mind, a lowly musician had taken her from him. That was unbearable. And once the doubt enters the mind, it can spread like poison and take over everything. So the D-Day was set. The nobles were ready to act. They had re-established contact with Moray, who had agreed to swoop in and take control of the palace once things kicked off. On March 9, 1566, Mary was enjoying a dinner with some close friend as usual. But suddenly, someone unexpected appeared, and it was Darnley. Now he was still the queen's husband, so no one could question his presence. So while it was awkward, people could only watch as he took a seat right next to Mary. But then, fully armed nobles began flooding in behind him. In a flash, they blocked off every exit. Mary stood up, furious. "Do you know where you are? How dare you enter armed like this?" One of the nobles just smirked and nodded toward Darnley. "Ask him," he said. All eyes turned to Darnley. And then Darnley panicked. He claimed he didn't know anything. He backed away. And as if the rebels were almost expecting this to happen, another noble stepped forward and said coldly, "We're here to set this country straight. There's a Vatican spy among us. We're only here for him. No one else will be harmed." It was clear. They were here for David Riccio. Mary tried to protect him, tried to get closer, but a noble drew a pistol and aimed it at her. "If you move, we can't promise what will happen next." Helpless, she watched as the nobles grabbed Riccio and dragged him away. He fought back fiercely, but they were too many. They hauled him into the next room. Mary, realizing what was happening, bit her lips and tried to rush after them. But just then, Darnley grabbed her and held her tight. So tight she couldn't move an inch, while from the other room, the screams began. Mary could do nothing but scream and curse. Enraged, she spat in Darnley's face, the man who had once been her great love, now reduced to a weak, pathetic accomplice. After the murder, as the nobles returned, Mary vowed revenge. Her eyes burned with a madness for a moment, but no one really noticed, and moments later, she was calm. She realized she was a prisoner now, powerless, so she retreated to her room to think. Outside, Mary's supporters, including the Earl of Huntly and the Earl of Bothwell, tried to force their way into the chamber. But the rebels told them they were merely getting rid of the Vatican spy and everything was under control. Bothwell and Huntly backed down, but quietly escaped the palace through a window that night, thinking that they would be more successful aiding Mary's escape from outside. But it was not that simple. She was confined in her chamber, and to escape, she would have to jump from a second-story window, which was risky by any measure, and surely not a move for 6-month pregnant Mary. Meanwhile, the nobles had already started securing power again. Moray returned and was resuming his role in government, and the nobles were working to erase any consequences from the rebellion. They wanted Mary to sign a declaration that no one would be punished for the murder of Riccio or the rebellion itself. Now the capture and detention of the Queen was high treason, the kind of crime that ends in execution. But the rebels wanted immunity. They were going to force her to sign it. But Mary knew that if she signed, she would be handing a blank check to her enemies. So she decided to escape to rejoin her supporters outside the palace. But first, she had to become someone she'd never been before, shrewd, cold, calculating. Almost like Elizabeth. That wasn't her style, but Mary knew to survive, she had to change. And she did. How did she manage to escape and regain control over Scotland? That is a story for the next episode.